Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, previous and future Floridians. It's really it's absolutely an honor to be here, and I say that jokingly, but I really do think that right now it's important that everybody understand, especially those who are not in the South, that what is happening there will not be contained there. What we are seeing unfold is part of a larger, very, very dangerous movement that is unfolding across the country. Now, Michael, you actually took me back to my childhood. Somebody asked me, when did you know you were gay? When did you come out? And I said, well, I remember I had my first girlfriend in 3rd grade. And I knew she was my girlfriend because she told me she was my girlfriend. But most importantly, she told our teacher that we were going to get married. And that teacher that you really like so much, you accidentally call them mom? All right. So this was that teacher that she told we were going to get married. And I remember vividly, it was, we were about to go to lunch, and our teacher told us, I used to say her name. I used to say my girlfriend's name, and she has an unusual last name, and somebody years ago said, how do you spell that last name? I was like, what are you doing? They're like, I'm going to Google her. And I said, no, you are not. I remember saying, I don't want to find out like she's campaigning for Sarah Palin or she's, died tragically. I said, she is preserved in amber for me. And so I will call her Amber. But I remember, so she said, Amber and Nadine, you have to stay I need to talk to you. And the whole class went, ooh. And I remember very solemnly, she told us that we couldn't get married. She told us that girls had to marry boys, and boys had to marry girls. And I remember Amber and I sat under the tree we always sat under, and she was crying, and I was furious. And I didn't know what gaydar was, but I remember I came up with a solution, and I went up to the gayest little boy in our class. I'll just make up a name for him, Jansen. I said, all right, Jansen, here's the deal. You and I are going to get married. You're going to change your last name to Smith. And then Amber is going to live with us after her husband is killed in the war. So, not sure we were at war at the time, but details. I would work on that later. So anyway, I told that story a couple of times, and after one speech, this woman came up to me, after people kind of gather at the stage, and she grabbed my hands. She's maybe 10, 15 years older than me, and she had tears in her eyes, and she said, that is the saddest thing I've ever heard. And I was like, I'm okay. And then it turned into that scene from Good Will Hunting, it wasn't your fault. Shut up. But, because she was making me confront how awful it actually was to have this teacher that I loved tell us this thing. It was the first adult who really told me that I should not exist in a very, very plain way. And I grew up in Florida, so it wasn't too many years later that the woman who used to be selling us orange juice all the time was now on television calling people like me pedophiles, making my school more dangerous, making my community more dangerous, making my state more dangerous, and eventually making my country more dangerous. And I think a lot about her because, in many ways, forgetting that history is particularly dangerous right now. It's important to remember that we've seen this before. Even before Anita Bryant, there was the Johns Committee, a legislative committee in Florida tasked with rooting out in Florida's public education system in the 50s and 60s all homosexuals, all advocates for civil rights for black people. And they were very efficient, they were ruthless, They destroyed careers. People took their lives if they came under the scrutiny of the Johns Committee. I had a friend who described falling in love for the first time, and even though the Johns Committee was lurking, she was a student at University of Miami, they weren't as careful as they should have been, and they got brought in on charges, and she lied and lied and lied, and to clear her name, they made her go on dates with men and keep a journal, which she was compelled to surrender anytime they asked her to. So I remember the Johns Committee, and it's important to remember Anita Bryant, and it's important to remember sort of like what is the Pennywise, the clown in It, that sort of foments and feasts on division and hate. We see these cycles occurring. And the other factor that is important to remember is that they never just come for the LGBTQ community. They understand intersectionality from the other side of the equation. They went after Black civil rights advocates in public schools, not just gay people. And when Anita Bryant took off, she was bankrolled by a group that is mostly known now around its opposition to access to abortion, but at the time, their biggest issue was that the Supreme Court had made private schools, they'd passed a law around integrating private schools, and that group was the Moral Majority. They were bankrolling Anita Bryant's campaign. And now, as we see the Don't Say LGBT bill introduced in Florida and others like it being introduced, we're also seeing these Stop Woke Act, which apply not only to schools in terms of erasing an honest teaching of American history, warts and all, but goes even further and tells corporate America, you can't train your workforce in a way that focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion without our permission, without following our guidelines. And I think it's important for us to understand that these racist attacks, these anti-LGBTQ attacks, and these attacks on our bodily autonomy always go hand in hand, because it is about control. And right now, I know you've been listening to a lot of really powerful speakers tell you how dire it is, and it's usually my job at Equality Florida events to say, I'm going to give it to you straight, so to speak. I'm going to tell you like it is. I'm going to tell you how bad it is. But I kind of feel like you got that. So I get to spend a little more time talking about the things that have me and make me hopeful. The number one thing that makes me hopeful is the decades of doing this work, because I do remember that Anita Bryant was larger than life, and we beat her. Hey, listen, not only did we beat her, but her granddaughter just married her longtime girlfriend quite recently. So, and it's important to remember that sometimes when it gets really bad, when it gets really dreary out there, we're on the verge of a breakthrough. I mean, think about marriage equality. How many defeats at the ballot box, year after year? What is it, 38, 37? A lawyer will fact check me. 30-something, right? And every one of them was horrible. I remember when the ballot measure passed in Florida, the same night that Barack Obama became president, talk about a bittersweet night. But when we looked at the polling afterwards, we saw something really curious in Florida. We saw support, not only for marriage, increased, but every single thing we were working on got stronger. How did we lose and things got stronger? Well, you can call it failing forward, you can call it, public education, but really what was happening was through those campaigns, we were making these things real. There were an awful lot of people who didn't think of themselves as activists, who were suddenly compelled to step up, who looked around and said 6 out of 10 of our neighbors went to the polls and said, your family doesn't get to have what our family has. and suddenly activists were born. I remember one of our organizing meetings around that. There was a group that all worked in the same building, and they talked about how there was one gay woman who would have nothing to do with them at work, even though they hung out after work. And then 2 weeks later, that same woman was at the organizing meeting, and what had happened is the petitioners had come to her door about repealing a human rights ordinance, and that was the moment that she snapped and chased them away with a hose and followed them down the street, shouting from the sidewalk to her neighbors, these people are coming after my family. And so activism gets born in a lot of different ways. I was a reporter, and I remember when a straight minister was sent to be the emissary to introduce a human rights ordinance in Tampa. And it went down in just total flames. But I was a reporter covering the city council, and I wasn't out to them, and they said all manner of things in front of me. And I remember thinking, I need to help these guys. Like I said, listen, your press releases are terrible, let me help you write them. And then eventually I was writing speeches, after I'd left the newspaper, and then one day the person who was supposed to give the speech didn't show up. And I remember standing there on the steps of a courthouse, and everyone was like, no, you read it. No, you read it. No, you wrote it. You read it. And I did. I read it just like this. And the next day in the newspaper, it said, activist Nadine Smith. And I thought, really? That's it? There's no certification? You just, okay, that works. So this is the part that makes me hopeful. We have been under these kinds of attacks. We have seen a White House totally indifferent to our community, sick and dying in the midst of an epidemic. We have grown up in schools where the thought of a gay-straight alliance was unimaginable, where the one teacher who was rumored to be gay in my junior high school committed suicide, and that was a punchline. We have been in places that were harder than this, worse than this, with fewer resources, fewer allies, fewer places to turn. And as much as those headlines might feel like we are going backwards, we aren't going backwards, but we've got to go through this. It is on the other side of this, I know. Not only will we stop them, but the thing we can't imagine to be true, that's the breakthrough that waits for us. There's so many of us in this room that never thought marriage equality would come in our lifetimes. And in some perverse way, the very people that organized state after state to deny us it, compelled the conversation that paved the way for the changing of hearts and minds. So the same father who reacted to me coming out with rage and anger, that was the last day as a teenager I lived under his roof, became a champion for marriage equality, did a commercial for marriage equality, walked me down the aisle when my wife, Andrea, and I got married. That evolution happened in the same way that it is happening right now. The majority of people do not stand with the folks who oppose us. And there's actually a danger in that. There's a professor who said America is waking up to what Germany came to understand, that a third of the country will stand silent while another third tries to annihilate that final third. There's a way that because we move in circles where people aren't always, who aren't attacking us, where we move in these supportive communities, these supportive circles, it's easy to be lulled into a false sense that we shouldn't be bringing the intensity that the opposition is bringing. But I think we saw very quickly how those safeguards that we thought, those guardrails, gave way. This is the most important thing I want to say tonight. We will not win by being them. We can't out-hate them. We can't out-destroy things. We don't want to live in the rubble anyway. Where we are right now is something that a demographer, Jeff Johnson, said that sort of rocked my world in 2016, or 2014, and it let me know, he was basically saying, this is why Trump is going to be president. He said, America is in the middle of a collision of demographics. The graying of America and the browning of America. And the graying of America is overwhelmingly white because of healthcare disparities and inequities. But it's disproportionately made up of people who hold political power and economic power, positional power, and they are terrified of the browning of America because in it there is a confession that they are terrified of being minorities in a country that has never treated minorities well. And so, we truly are at this fork in the road. Make America great means move America backwards. Consolidate power in fewer hands. Erase these gains. Scapegoat, demonize, vilify anyone who doesn't look like us, believe like us, love like us. And then the other path is the path where my 11-year-old son and your grandkids and the kids that you and your partner are planning but haven't had yet, and that Trump voter, and the people yelling at kids at school board meetings. There has to be an irresistible vision of a future that isn't simply a response to the fear that they have generated. It has to be an irresistible, inclusive future that people can imagine, they can taste, they can see, and they see a place for themselves within it. That's the first part. The second thing that we have to do, is deepen our sense of community. And I mean, we are supposed to look out for each other. We're supposed to show up for each other. And there's an intensity gap because the people who hate are standing in the streets, they're yelling at the top of their lungs, they are doing everything to intimidate. But we've seen them before. We've stood in front of them before. And when I say we have to deepen our sense of community, I don't just mean look out for your strong friends and self-care. I mean, we have to be very intentional about listening to the voices of people who are bearing the brunt, not only so that we understand what we're up against, but I promise you, they understand what we're up against better than you do, because their survival has depended on understanding exactly what we're up against. So deepen community. Reach out and ask yourself who's missing, whose voice isn't here, who's not on our board, who's not at our meeting. It's going to change how you organize. And the final part, and this may be the most important one, the way you stand up to terror is not to be terrorized. Love, hope, and joy may be the corniest ways to end this speech. But it is the thing that has gotten us through over and over and over again. At every turn, we have love makes you brave. Joy makes you clever. And hope makes you strong. And we have needed that. We have needed that resilience. But there, in this moment, it is the antidote to what they are coming at us with. It is the antidote to fear. And so let us continue, as we always have, to be resilient, to sing in our grief, to laugh in our pain, to look out for one another, and to hold on to love, hope, and joy. Thank you.